And welcome. We are in Junior English, and we now turn to passage 52 of Whitman's Song of Myself from Leaves of Grass. I'm with you on page 431 of your hymnal, and I just want to turn now and ask a couple of questions before we get started. These are kind of setup questions. You can work at level 1 with them, for example. Question 1, how do you end a project like Song of Myself? This amazing project of all of these poems, we come to passage 52, and the question for Whitman is, how do you end it? Of course, for Whitman, this is a complicated question, because in 1855 he ends it, and then he publishes it. But by 1892, at least 6 different times, Whitman has picked up the volume Leaves of Grass, and of course the poem within it, Song of Myself, and asked, how do I edit it? Do I want to keep editing? I think it's important to point out that Whitman was a man, a poet, who was constantly evolving, changing. He didn't like to ossify. He didn't want it to be set in stone. And yet, what will be his final words? Many have constituted this, along with Farewell My Fancy, the last poem of Leaves of Grass, as his farewell song. Let's listen to this passage 52. Read along with me. I'm with you on page 431. Really try and stay with the reading here. Really try to follow the words. Hear Whitman at his best as he's finishing this classic set of lines called Song of Myself. The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yop over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds. It coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean. But I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere, waiting for you. Now again, let's go back to something we said about passage 51 at 2b. This is the very close, personal, intimate poet Whitman, who is speaking directly to you, the reader, as he finishes his poem, Song of Myself. Notice he begins with a bird. Again, we point out, Whitman loved his birds. And he begins with a bird. Notice the hawk, the spotted hawk, swoops by, accuses me, complains of my gab, lots of talking, and my loitering. Whitman was a great loafer. And in fact, he talked often in his poetry about how he loved to simply go to the park, lay on his back, and look up at the sky and watch the clouds go by. Now, you can appreciate a 5-year-old doing that, right? I mean, that is for some of you what you did when you were a kid, lying back in the grass, looking up at the sky, taking a little nap, daydreaming, just relaxing in the warm sun. Whitman does it when he's an old man. He did it his whole life. He would, for example, leave break and go out from his job and go out and just lay in the grass and take in the beauty of nature. So here he says, the hawk seems to come by and say, hey, what's up with all of this talking, gabbing, and this sitting around doing nothing? Notice, he then sees himself as somehow equal with the hawk. Look what he says about himself. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. At 3a, this line will relate nicely to passage 51. Do I contradict myself? Fine, I contradict myself. I contain multitudes. Notice here he says, I am untranslatable. One of the things a lot of my students like about this poetry is that Whitman comes right out and says it. Don't try and understand what this poetry means, because there is no necessary meaning. There is only the experience, the language of experience. He says, I sound my barbaric yop over the roofs of the world. Now, let's jump to 3A for a moment. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this title. One of the most famous moments is the great Robin Williams, who of course we lost and tragically lost, the great Robin Williams film, Dead Poets Society. If there is a film that I can recommend to you that helps you appreciate the beauty of Walt Whitman's poetry, it is this classic film about a teacher who teaches in an all-boys school, and above his desk where he teaches is a picture of Walt Whitman that stands there. It's almost like it's the inspiration for him in his teaching. And one morning he challenges his class to sound their barbaric yop out loud. What will it sound like? What is a yop? The sound a hawk makes, that loud sound. In other words, Whitman is going to say that his poetic venture is a screaming out loud, a yop out loud that tries as much as it can to translate what is untranslatable, we might say. Notice he says, the last scud of day holds back for me the end of his life, the end of the evening. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as on any of the shadow's wiles. It coaxes me to vapor and the dusk. Whitman saw his life as a day, where you have a morning, an afternoon, and then an evening, as the sun starts to set. Now, he wasn't original with this idea. Poets as early as Homer played this game. But at 3b, it does beg a really interesting question. Let's go there real quickly at 3b. If your life is like a day, where are you in your day? Are you in the morning? Are you in the afternoon? Are you in the evening? When you are a senior, you will study the great poet John Keats, who at the age of 20 begins to cough up blood because his lungs are diseased with consumption. And he realizes, I don't have many more days left. In a moment, his life moved from being in his morning or his afternoon to the evening of his life. What is it for you? Whitman says, I recognize I'm kind of moving to the end of it. Of course, he's also coming to the end of Song of Myself. Notice he says, I depart as air. I shake my white locks. Whitman had long white hair. If you've ever seen a picture of him, he had long white hair. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift in lacy jags. Let's just point out for you at level 1, Whitman identifies himself and his body as part of nature, a return to nature. Notice he says, I bequeath or give up myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. It is significant that Whitman opened Song of Myself referencing grass, a spear of summer grass. And he finishes passage 52. He finishes Song of Myself referencing again grass, the grass that he loves. It is the symbol of all symbols. It grows everywhere, right? Grass of all different kinds. And of course, it's funny, as I've said in an earlier lecture, to realize that you eat grass. No, cows eat grass. No, you eat grass if you eat bread. Because bread is from grain, which is grass. In other words, for Whitman, grass is the greatest symbol of what it means to be alive, nature. And so he says, when I'm dead, they will bury me, as he talks about in passage 6, under the ground. What grows out of the ground? Grass. In other words, you translate out of this body into grass once you're buried. And he says, there's something really interesting about that. Notice he continues, if you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. It's a famous line. Whitman says, after I die, I become part of the dirt, the very dirt that you will walk on top of. And to that degree, I'm there, right underneath your feet. Again, notice the intimacy of this poetic project. Finally, he says, You will hardly know who I am or what I mean. Earlier he has said I'm untranslatable. In passage 51 he says I contradict myself. Don't even try and understand what I'm saying. Notice he says, but I will be good health to you nevertheless, and fiber and filter your blood. Let's point out that Whitman argues at level 1 here, level 1. Whitman argues that reading his poetry is good for you. The word we would use is a propedeutic. It's instructional. It makes you a better person, he says. Don't worry, he says, I will take care of you. It's like an early self-help manual. If you want to be a better person, he says, read my poetry. Because everything that I can explain about what I understand about the world is contained in my poetry. There are some of us who have argued that the single greatest educational experiment would be to get rid of all of the books except for Leaves of Grass and just read it, and read it again, and read it again, and go for walks out into the mountains or into the woods, or out on the ocean, and read it again. That is to say, this volume has for a lot of people been the volume of their life, the volume that explains the real questions they care about. He says, if you are looking for him, failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. This is an encouragement to keep reading, because sometimes his poetry will be hard to understand. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere waiting for you. Not only is this a very intimate kind of conversation that he's having with you, the reader, but notice he says, I'm always going to be out in front of you. I'm always going to be gesturing towards the future, not the past. In other words, Whitman prided himself on writing poetry that would be read long, long after he was dead. In 1992, we celebrated 100 years after Whitman's death. We're way beyond 1992, and Whitman's poetry continues to be read by millions of people all over the globe. I was privileged, as I've said in an earlier lecture, to be a part of the very first Whitman conference in China many years ago at the turn of the century. It was an amazing thing to talk with Chinese teachers and students about their love of Walt Whitman's poetry, the only volume that Mao Zedong allowed to be translated during the Cultural Revolution. That is a fascinating statistic. Whitman's poetry continues to be then, and Song of Myself continues to be a poem that is going to challenge us to think about what it means to be a reader and a writer, to be human, what it means to be alive. Let's now finish. If we were to jump really quickly now to 3A, we would maybe ask this question about texts you're familiar with. What is the text that you have read or seen that makes you want to be a better person? That makes you want to try to live your life better? Is there a text for you that does that? Is there a song when you're down and you're feeling kind of low and you're feeling like things are not going well for you? Is there a song that you listen to that kind of picks you up? Write that song's title down. What do you use? Now to 3B. What do you use to make yourself more happy? When you start feeling down, when you start feeling like life is no good, what do you do? Do you go somewhere? Do you have a conversation with someone? Maybe even yourself? Do you listen to something? Do you read something? What is your plan for when you have a downer day? I've had ball players who love to say that when I'm having a bad day, the best thing I know is to go out and to perform in my sport. It's everything. I step across the lines, out onto the training pitch or the playing field or the court, and for me, all of a sudden, life starts to make sense. What is it for you that allows you, helps you to get through a crummy day, a crummy week? For some of us, can we even say it out loud because we've experienced it, a crummy month? One student once said, a crummy 3 years. That was middle school for me. And somehow I had to get through that hell. And I came out on the other side. Think about going forward in your future. and maybe utilizing the text to help you do that. If Song of Myself does anything, it becomes Song of Yourself. Thank you.